Welcome to the BIG Archaeology Podcast.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Dave Sadler of the Archaeology and Metal Detecting magazine, and also of the BIG Archaeology Podcast. Now, it's the first archaeology podcast that we've done tonight. A very special guest we've got. Obviously, in the past we do the big metal detecting podcasts and also the news as well. So, a very special guest tonight, author of a book that's coming out in the following week. Very worldwide respected, Andrew Collins. Good evening, Andrew.
Hi Dave, how are you?
Brilliant. I'm checking my sources and everything's working fine now. So we've had a bit of a to-do off air, but we're all sorted and raring to go.
Indeed.
So, Andrew, if you don't mind, briefly telling listeners a little bit about your history and your works.
Yeah. Well, I classify myself as a science and history writer simply because that's what I write about. But I think my background is probably well known, and it was journalism, which basically models, the way that I write, the way that I think, the way that I put things together, and by virtue of that, the books that I write. And I've probably written around 15 books so far. Some of which have been bestsellers around the world, that challenge the way that we look at the past. That's why I like to, present them, and they include everything from books on the origins of civilization to the origins of the pyramids. I've done books on Tutankhamun, various other things, the origins of angels, and my work has gradually actually been getting a little bit more and more scholarly as I'm going along, to the point now which I'm looking at the very origins of modern humans, and how we might have been influenced by whoever was around before us, which in Europe was the Neanderthals, and further east in Central Asia through into Eastern and Southeastern Asia and beyond would have been these people called the Denisovans. And the subject of my most recent book, the one that's coming out in the UK next week, is this very matter, that who the Denisovans are and the impact that they had on humankind. It's co-authored with my colleague Greg Little, who is an expert on genetics and how they impacted the American Genesis, and also how they relate to the peoples that created the different mound complexes across North America from around 10,000 years ago through until the time of contact. So that's where we're at, really. But I think obviously the bigger question is, who the hell are the Denisovans, and why are you talking about them today?
And I'm personally, my history goes back to around 2010, when there was initially one discovered what they call the humanoid skeleton in the Denisovan cave in Siberia, and that's where the Denisovan name comes from. Am I correct?
Yes. I mean, if you can just sort of take yourself, to Siberia, southern Siberia, the Altai mountains, which stretch all the way from Russia right the way down into Mongolia, and there's a cave there. Archaeologists have been working on it on and off since the 1970s, and in 2008, in a layer corresponding to about 50,000 years ago, they came across a finger bone. Now, it looked human, as in modern human, so they sent it away for testing to two laboratories, and one of those was the Max Planck Institute of Physical Anthropology in Leipzig in Germany, and they crushed it up. They sequenced it to get the full sequence of the genes, the so-called genome, out of it, and the results were just extraordinary, because it was clear that this finger bone did not belong either to an anatomical modern human or to a Neanderthal. Indeed, it was so unique that it could even be classed as coming from a separate species. Now, initially they called this individual X-woman, but very gradually it gained the name Denisovan, as in the Denisova cave, and that's how we've got their existence today. But in the same level that the Denisovan, this finger bone was found, archaeologists also found 3 other human teeth, and two of these were incredibly large. I mean, one of them so large that they felt that it was that of a cave bear initially. It was so big, but when this was examined, it was also found to be that of a Denisovan. And since that time, they found 2 adjoining fragments of a skull, quite a large skull and very thick and robust, which has also been confirmed to be Denisovan. And outside of the influence of the cave itself, the only absolutely confirmed piece of anatomical evidence of the Denisovans comes from the very edge of the Tibetan plateau in what is today northwest China, and this is of a mandible. A mandible was found in 1980 by a monk who was in there presumably praying or something, and he had the sense to pick it up, give it to his local lama, who gave it to a local university, who kept it in a drawer, but it was brought out again with all of this, new discoveries to do with the Denisovans. It was checked, and the protein within it determined that it too was Denisovan. So we got all these pieces, which clearly you could probably put in a cupped hand as far as the anatomical evidence of Denisovans is concerned. However, the fact is that the genome itself revealed that some of the genes of the Denisovans had been passed on to modern humans in different populations around the world, although essentially in Central Asia, Eastern Asia, Southeast Asia, Papua New Guinea, Australia, Oceania in the Pacific, and also to a lesser degree various tribes, indigenous peoples in North America have Denisovan DNA. So we know that the hybrid descendants of the Denisovans got around a bit, and this gives us a good idea where the Denisovans might have been in the first place. I mean, clearly they were in Siberia, clearly they were in Tibet, what is Tibet, and obviously northwest China, and there are various other bones and mandibles and things like this that the archaeologists have been looking towards as possible Denisovan, but unfortunately, as it is so difficult to extract the genome, the nuclear DNA, and even the mitochondrial, the bacteria DNA that's in us all, from remains that are so old that they've only been able to do it in places where the climate has been just right, and that's places like the Denisova cave or Tibet, where it's extremely cold environments. But hopefully, as the time goes on, we will be able to confirm that we already have Denisovan bones, Denisovan skulls, Denisovan mandibles, and whatever. But we can speculate. But on top of this is the fact that from the very layers in the Denisova cave, where the bones and the teeth have been found, they've also discovered what could be described as elements of high technology, and which go well beyond what would have been expected for, let's say, 40, 50,000 years ago. For instance, just look up the Denisovan bracelet. Now, this is a very beautiful bangle made of a green stone known as chloritolite or chlorite, which has been beautifully fashioned some 45, 50,000 years ago, and it's beautifully polished, and the geometry of it suggests that it could even have been laid, but I don't think it has. It's just been perfectly done, in a handmade fashion. But it has a drill pierced through it, which was presumably for some kind of object to be dangled from it. I mean, it suggested it may have been some kind of disc or something. And the hole, the hole that's been penetrated, was done with a drill, presumably a stone drill, but the feed rate of that drill is so fast that it's comparable with a modern day drill. Now, this is not to suggest that they had electrical drills or anything like that, but somehow these Denisovans were clever enough to work out how to create a high-speed drill. But in addition to this, we find in the same layer the oldest known needles, bone needles. And these have eye holes in the end, and they're very clearly for sewing, most obviously for tailored clothing. We also find the earliest confirmed fragments of a musical instrument, one that's even older than any that are found in Europe. So this suggests that the Denisovans had a knowledge and understanding of music and how to replicate it, and obviously to play it, using the holes that create different notes on a whistle or flute. Beyond this, there is tentative evidence, and I mean this is incredibly controversial, that from horse DNA and bone fragments that have been found in the Denisova cave, it is possible that the Denisovans domesticated and perhaps even rode horses. But the most important thing to come out of the cave is that there are blade tools, stone blade tools made of locally sourced stone, which are of a type that will eventually come to be used by our Upper Paleolithic ancestors from around 45,000 years ago. And indeed, just within the past few weeks, archaeologists have found very similar, incredibly early blade tools at a site in northern Mongolia. Although it's probably about 1,500 miles away from the Denisova cave, the technology that's been found at this site, which is called Tolbor 16, are very similar to what's been found in the Denisovan layer of the Denisova cave. And it's being suggested that this early blade technology may well have been passed on to modern humans, and that we adopted it for our toolkit and used it not just through the age of the Upper Paleolithic era, but beyond that into the Neolithic era, right the way down almost until the invention of bronze, and its widespread use and manufacture from around 3000 BC onwards. So this is quite extraordinary, and of course this raises the question of whether or not the Denisovans may have given us, when I say us I mean anatomical modern humans, the rudiments of technology and thus civilization. And that's obviously something very, very exciting indeed, and that's something that we try to explore in this new book.
It's very interesting. I've been, while you've been speaking, I've been reading and what have you, obviously information, and I noticed that the mandible that was found in China, the dating that at something like 160,000 years, which is a lot longer before, nearly 100,000 years before Denisovan at the Russian cave.
Well, yes and no. Yes, from the point of view of the technology that's been discovered, which probably only dates to maybe 50,000. I mean, some have suggested 60 to 70, but let's be conservative with around 50,000 at the moment. But the Denisovans were at the Denisova cave from around 200,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. That this seems to be the possible oldest age of some of the remains and the layers in which those bones have been found. But so, in other words, the fact that they were in Tibet, for instance, 160,000 years ago, is only really contemporary with whatever was probably going on in Siberia as well. So, but at some point, the Denisovans achieved some kind of state of advanced human behaviour leading to the creation of technology. Now, the Russian archaeologists who have been working at the site and obviously write about the Upper Paleolithic of Siberia are in no doubt that it's the Denisovans who are responsible for these items. But unfortunately, that's not the way that some of their contemporaries view it in Britain, for instance. They see it as well, quite clearly anatomical modern humans could have reached southern Siberia by this time, bringing with them these rudiments of technology, and just either introduce them to the Denisovans or the Denisovan hybrids, because remember we obviously mated with them, or that they just happen to be the ones in the cave, and that's that remains a slim possibility. But I think that we're taking away, just as we did with the Neanderthals, the ability for these peoples to have invented a lot of this stuff themselves. I mean, I've just done an article today, for instance, which will be published in a few days, about the discovery at a cave called Quesem. And if I mispronounce that, I apologise to those involved, just outside of Tel Aviv in Israel, of the discovery of a swan wing bone that has clear knife marks on it, suggesting the removal of feathers. And all of this has led to the conclusion from the Israeli archaeologists working on this, and there's a new paper coming out in the Journal of Human Evolution, that they were involved in animism and shamanism as early as 420,000 years ago. Now, this is absolutely quite extraordinary, because this is something that is attributed to modern humans, but also possibly to very late Neanderthals, who probably lived, between 100 and 40,000 years ago. But this was going on over 400,000 years ago. We don't even know who it was that was doing this in Israel at that time, although human teeth that have been found in the cave and that date to the same period would tend to suggest that the people in there were a very early form of anatomical modern humans, which is just throwing everything out, because in theory the oldest confirmed anatomical evidence of modern humans comes from Morocco, from recent discoveries at a site there which only dates to about 312,000 years old. So there was a hell of a lot going on very, very early, and there is no reason why a lot of these technologies could not have developed prior to the arrival of modern humans in Siberia around 45,000 years ago. But, let's throw all the facts in and let archaeology come up with some conclusions as we go along. I think that's the only way and the only fair way of looking at it right now.
It certainly is. Some of the information that's obvious. Sadly, I'm using Wikipedia. We found out you shouldn't use that already this week once, but there's so much information available. The nuclear genome analysis, the mitochondrial DNA analysis, the epigenetics, interbreeding, and that interests me greatly. The interbreeding with other beings at that time, Neanderthals and such like.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, we did it. There's no question we did it, just as we did with the Neanderthals, because we know that we have up to 2 to 3% of Neanderthal DNA in Europe, and as far as the Denisovans are concerned, we have anything up to 5 to 6%. When I say we, I certainly probably don't. I mean, I was born and bred in Britain, and the chances of me having any Denisovan DNA are probably quite zero, because hardly any Denisovan DNA has been found amongst any populations in Europe. The only exception is amongst the Finns, the people of Finland, because they themselves have anything up to about 6% Asian ancestry anyway. So with that has obviously come a very small amount of Denisovan DNA, clearly probably from North Asia beyond the Ural Mountains. But it's not there, or it's certainly so watered down in Europe now that it's absolutely undetectable. But having said that, it's actually strange, because I was actually contacted by somebody this week who were in America. All their ancestry is from France, Britain, Germany, and yet they did the genetics testing done with Nat Geo, and they were told, I say they, it was her and I think her husband, both were told that they had up to 3% Denisovan DNA. And I've heard this before, and strange enough, by people that have actually gone to the Nat Geo one, which is one of the only ones, as far as I know, that can do and tell you whether you've got Denisovan DNA up to this point. And by the way, when I say DNA, this is not nuclear DNA, this is mitochondrial DNA. That's the bacteria that's within us that helps the cells function. Mm-hmm. So where that came from is a mystery, but what it probably tells me is that Denisovans were once in Europe, but that those that came afterwards watered down that DNA so much that it's undetectable in any modern human populations. And this is something I do go into in my part of Denisovan Origins, because what I show is that these technologies that were developed in places like the Denisova Cave as early as 45,000 years ago then migrate, are carried into other parts of the ancient world. They're carried eastwards, for instance, into China and the Russian Far East. They're carried southwards into the Indian subcontinent, and they're carried most specifically westwards into Europe. And they almost leave like a paper trail of activity that begins in the area of the Altai Mountains and Mongolia. Then it passes through western Siberia, then it crosses the Ural Mountains into Eastern Europe, and then forms another trail that ends up in places like Czechoslovakia as early as 30,000 years ago, and then is adopted by the Solutrean peoples of southwest Europe around 22,000 years ago down to about 17,000 years ago. And this includes not just blade tool technology, but also, for instance, the use of needles, which, as I said, the earliest needle that we know of is found in the Siberian cave, the Denisova Cave. And yet, if you then, and I did this for the book, I then tried to trace all the earliest needles, and it's a clear trail that goes from Siberia eastwards and eastwards into other parts of Asia and westwards into Europe, and is picked up by the Gravatian peoples, for instance, at places like Kostenki on the River Don and Sungar, which is not far from Moscow, I think. And these are so-called Eastern Gravatian sites. And then these needles are found even further west, and they're eventually adopted by the Solutreans. And clearly all these people were using them almost certainly to manufacture tailored clothing. And the other interesting fact, I bring this out as well, is that the Solutreans, there is some tentative evidence that the Solutreans domesticated and rode horses. Now, this is again very controversial. It's also something that archaeologists don't like. In fact, they hate the Solutreans for some reason. I don't know why. And it's very possible that the Solutreans and their forebears, who you might refer to as the Proto-Solutreans, who seem to be associated with the Eastern Gravatian peoples, were bringing certain technologies and ideas westwards across the Ural Mountains into Europe as early as 35,000 years ago. And it's a wave of activity. It's there. There's evidence of this in genetics. I mean, David Reich, one of the main geneticists that's been involved with the study of the Denisovans ever since, the genome of this little finger back in 2010. He wrote a book which came out last year called, and I'm just looking at this very moment, called Who We Are and How We Got Here. Incredible book. And that also talks about the migrations of peoples coming out of the area of the Altai Mountains of Siberia, coming westwards, that conforms with the ideas of the Eastern Gravatian peoples at places like Konstanki, having their origins much further in the east. So, this is the sort of material we're dealing with, and we haven't even come on to America yet.
Can I just ask before we get to America? Can you put it in my head, the timeline differential between the Solutrean and the Clovis culture?
Yeah, I mean, the Solutreans officially were around from around 20,000 BC to 15,000 BC. That was their timeline. That's when they were around. That's when they were doing their thing, mostly in southwest Europe, in the areas of western France, although central as well, but also northern and northeastern Spain. And of course, what you're beginning to allude to here, and we might as well get on to now, is the idea that the Solutreans, and this is an idea that was put through by Bruce Bradley and Dennis Stanford in a book called, two academics in a book called Across Atlantic Ice, that there was huge similarities between the Solutrean tools and projectile points, which are all manufactured using a particular style of technology known as pressure flaking, and those of the Clovis culture that emerge in North America around 11,200 BC. So that's nearly 4,000 years later than the Solutreans. And they showed the similarities between the two types of tool manufacture. But of course the skeptics said, well, hold on, there's a big gap in between. But since the publication of Across Atlantic Ice in 2012, a number of projectile points, leaf points, bipoints as they're called, have been discovered, particularly in the area of the Chesapeake Bay on the eastern coast of North America, that predate the Clovis culture and are even more similar to the style of the Solutrean leaf points themselves. And in fact, one example is actually even manufactured from a type of stone that is only found in France. Mm-hmm. And you think that would be the smoking gun that would say, well, this proves that the Solutreans were there. But Dennis Stanford and Bruce Bradley have said, no. Yes, it's good evidence, but the problem is that because it was found beneath a colonial homestead that was being excavated, they can never 100% discount the possibility that it was dropped. They cannot do that, and that's a terrible shame, but it is tentative evidence that the Solutrean hypothesis is real, as they call it. But the big problem with all of this is that archaeologists hate the concept of the Solutrean hypothesis for the reasons that it's been picked up on by white supremacists to suggest that Europeans reached the Americas before Asians did, coming obviously from the Russian Far East. But as I tried to show in my part of the book, Denisovan Origins, is that all of the indications tell us that the Solutreans were themselves the descendants of North Asian peoples. In other words, they were more Asian than they were, Europoid or Caucasian in nature. They were Asians, and they were pushing their way ever westwards, and when they reached the Atlantic coast of Europe, they didn't stop. They continued to push out onto the Atlantic ice, the ice flows that existed at the time of the last glacial maximum, all the way down probably as far as the Bay of Biscay, Biscay, right the way across to the Chesapeake Bay, where all of these stone tools have been found. And there is tentative evidence that the Solutreans had the boats to do it. I mean, I show examples of cave art in the book that you look at them and you think, yeah, these are boats. These are like the skiffs that were used, for instance, by the Inuit peoples of Greenland, Canada, Alaska, etc. And there's other, pictographs that suggest boats with sails. Okay, it's tentative stuff, but it is circumstantial evidence that the Solutreans were, not just creating little boats to go and fish offshore islands, but were going much further afield and may just have reached the Americas. And if they did reach the Americas, the chances are some of them did stay there and create some of the earliest colonies in that region. But having said that, what Greg and I also make very clear is that there were much, much earlier migrations into the Americas coming in from Asia via the Beringia land bridge, and also almost certainly via maritime exploration from Ireland, Southeast Asia, across Oceania, through the Pacific, and making landfall at places like South America. And the ocean currents tell us all of that is possible. And this would explain the presence of Austro-Melanesian DNA in a number of indigenous peoples, particularly in South America and in particular in the Amazon region of Brazil, where quite clearly it was preserved across a very long period of time. Mm-hmm. So that's the picture there.
It's absolutely fascinating. I know about the Clovis. I've read about the Clovis in the past. I've read about the Solutrean hypotheses. I keep fumbling my word here. The Denisovan Society is Denisovan. We get there. The Denisovan Society is something that it's very young in relation to the information that's available, the factual information. Yeah. And obviously yourself and Mr. Little and other people are bringing that to a wider audience now, which is fantastic. Yeah. So I have a question to go back a little bit to when we're talking about DNA and each individual's own DNA. We know that you can go out and you can buy your small DNA testing kits and you can send them off to find your where you've come from in the past. Would that small, cheap, because it will be quite cheap in comparison to all the other testing that goes on, DNA testing kit, would that be able to ascertain Denisovan Society? Denisovan.
With most of them, no.
Yeah.
23andMe and all that sort of thing. And I mean, I might be doing these guys an injustice, but as far as I'm aware, there is only a few. And when I say a few, I actually know of only one that will definitely tell you if you have Denisovan and Neanderthal DNA, and that's Nat Geo. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can find about it online. It's easy to see there. Yeah, the Nat Geo do their own version, National Geographic. Mm-hmm. That's the one you want to go for. I think it is slightly more expensive than the others, but the others are not that bothered, I don't think, with the idea. I think they might tell you about Neanderthal, but whether they've got the accessibility to the databanks for the Denisovans, I'm not sure. I don't think they have. So if you want to find out if you have Denisovan ancestry, go to National Geographic, their genome project or whatever they call it. I can't remember it, but that's the one. And as I said, I've had a couple of people, European, Caucasian people say, look, we had our tests done and we came back positive for Denisovan. What's going on? So the first thing I do is to say, well, look, what does it say about your ancestors? Where does it say that your ancestors came from? And of course, for the most part, they'll say, well, 97% European, Germany, France, England, or whatever. But there's always something that's much further afield. And in the instance this week, it was from Russia. They had a small amount of ancestry, maybe 1-2% from Russia. They also had some ancestry quite specifically from southwest France, which is where the Solutreans were, which I find interesting. And what else? Poland. So I said there is a possibility that your Denisovan DNA, which was up to 3%, which is a hell of a lot, could have come from any one of these sources, or collectively all of them. Beyond that, I don't know, is the honest answer. Mm-hmm. And there was another person, a lady who approached me a while back, and she also said the same thing. Now, she was red-haired, Caucasian, and I said, well, look, tell me about your ancestry. Well, most of it Western European, Italian, but a little bit Iranian. I said, well, there you go. That is the possibility. The further you get east, the more likely it is that that's where your Denisovan DNA is coming from. Mm. So, if any of your listeners out there have done a similar test and have come back positive for Denisovans, I'd love to hear from them, because, I'd like to try and work it out, because what it does show is that there are Europeans with Denisovan DNA out there, but not many of them. That's the thing, because if they're then put into a pool of 500,000 other people, the whole thing just gets washed out, and the general percentage just gets down so low that you might as well say there is no Denisovan ancestry in these people.
Interesting. Now, onto your new book, Denisovan Origins, which, am I right in saying that's by Bear and Company, the publisher?
Yes, Bear and Company. I think I've got a copy in front of me. I wish I have. Hold on, let's have a look. What does it say? Inner Traditions is the main company, but
right.
Yeah, one of their imprint names is Bear and Company. So it is actually. Yeah, Bear and Company.
And that's out already in the US, I think.
Yes.
And they launch for this coming Thursday, the 3rd, when the book will be available.
That's right. Yeah.
Excellent.
People could get it from Amazon, Barnes and Noble, or anything. Just put Amazon Denisovan in your search engine, and the book will come up straight away, because it is the first book with Denisovan in the title. So that means that it's extremely accessible as far as just typing it into Google is concerned. But it was a project that has really taken 5 years to put together, and what I've done is the perspective of the Eurasian continent and everything that was going on there, the Denisovan cave, all the discoveries, all the technologies, and how that moved into Europe, how it moved into Eastern, Southeastern Asia, etc. And then I sort of push it off the edge of the Eurasian continent into the Americas, and that's where Greg comes in, because he does part two, and that's all about the receiving of that DNA into the Americas, how old American civilization is, how old people have been in, how long the Americans have been there, when was the American Genesis, basically. Mm-hmm. So he takes that side of it, really. So it's a perfect combination, and he's a brilliant writer, and I'm so glad that I had him on board for the project.
And it suggests that, am I right in saying this, that the mounds in North America, where we mentioned previously about the Clovis culture, it's been suggested that that's the past. In some respects, it's now suggesting it could be the Denisovans. I'm going to get this right by the end of the night, please excuse me. That had a lot to do with it.
Yeah. Okay. Right, the book's subtitle is Human Hybrids Göbekli Tepe, which we haven't even talked about, but and the genesis of the giants of ancient America. My publishers love long titles, and the reason why they love long titles is because they can get as many buzzwords as possible in it, so that when you do a search of Amazon, your book will come up if it's got those buzzwords in. That's the reason for these sillily long titles. But anyway, okay, so here's the thing. Over the last 150 years, there have been literally thousands of oversized human skeletons found in Native American cemeteries and mound complexes across North America. There is no question that there were communities, groups of oversized individuals existing in North America in the past. Call them giants if you want. Most of them were probably around 7.5 feet in height. They would seem to have been an elite. And I say that because very often when their bodies were found, they were in the middle of a circle of normal-sized individuals. So it showed that they were the important ones. They were very often dressed or were found with high-status goods, high-status funerary goods, which suggests that either or they are leaders of a group, or they're shamans, because obviously shamans would have taken with them the different paraphernalia that they would have used during their lives. And therefore, we're definitely talking about, giant individuals, if you like. But then the question comes, are they simply people suffering from what we would today call gigantism, which, as we know, can take people anything up to 9 to 10 feet in height? Or is this pure genetics? In other words, that their genes are such that on a regular basis these individuals would grow to 7 to 7.5 feet tall. Well, Greg did a study of this. There is an area called the Kanawha Valley in West Virginia where dozens and dozens of these increased sized individuals have been found, their skeletons. And he worked out, based upon the amount of skeletons that were found of normal sized individuals, that the percentage was far too high for these oversized individuals simply to be sufferers of gigantism. In other words, they were a separate human group in their own right. So, what's the link with the Denisovans, we ask? This is it. Well, the bones and teeth that have been found of the Denisovans so far in Siberia are all oversized. And the geneticists that have been working with this material have said these must have been big guys, very big guys. And I wouldn't like to have met them basically on a dark night. That's what they're saying. That's what they're saying. They're not saying, oh, they're dwarfs, or oh, they are normal-sized individuals, or they are hobbits or something. They're saying that these are big, big guys. And the image that I get conjured in my head when I hear this is something like the largest wrestlers that you could imagine. If you can imagine some of these big wrestlers in the WWE going anything up to 7 feet or 7.5 feet tall, that's what we're looking at here. That's what I think at least some of the Denisovans look like. Not all of them, but some of them. And if that's so, then I think that there's every possibility that the oversized individuals that are found in the mound complexes and the cemeteries, the Native American cemeteries, which mostly, by the way, date to the Adena period, which is from about 1000 BC down to about the time of Christ, that these are the descendants of Denisovan human hybrids that entered into the Americas at a very early date. Some of these giant bones actually do go back to 3,000 to 4,000 BC that have been found at some of these islands off of California. But unfortunately, a lot of those are not in proper archaeological context, so it becomes very difficult to use it as evidence. So there is evidence that these oversized individuals were certainly in the Americas from 3 to 4,000 BC, and thus we must assume from a much earlier date as well.
Now, on to another country. Now, of all archaeology that I come across, and the places that I've been Egypt, I've been Malta, I've been all over. My favourite place for archaeology will always remain Turkey.
Right.
In fact, we were lucky enough to have a gentleman contact us a couple of days ago with some images of finds that he'd made in Elazig city, which we published on the website, because he's found some things out in the wilds that he'd like to assist with identification in relation to the history of that area and such like. Okay. So I'm very interested in ancient Turkey. I was down at Dalyan this summer, so I paid a visit to the archaeological site over the water at Dalyan. But one place I've really always wanted to go, and again, I'm not just saying it because I'm talking to yourself, is that of Göbekli Tepe.
Yeah. Yes. Somewhere very popular this week. For all the wrong reasons. It's okay. Well, look, my history with Göbekli Tepe is this. As early as 1996, I wrote a book called From the Ashes of Angels. It was based upon the mythology of the Near East, everything from the Bible to apocryphal material to Mesopotamian mythology, suggesting that there was some kind of human group in that area that was remembered as oversized, giant, but also as angels, human angels, not with wings, but wearing cloaks of feathers. And I pinned them down to the pre-pottery Neolithic peoples of southeast Anatolia and northern Syria, northern Iraq, western Iran, and said that these people were there at the very end of the last ice age, and they kick-started civilization. They're responsible for the spread of the Neolithic Revolution, and that they're remembered in folklore, myths and legends as the angels, the Anunnaki, the Nephilim, the Watchers, the Immortals, various different names like this. That was the book From the Ashes of Angels. Now, as I was writing that book in 1995, the first spades were going in the ground at a place called Göbekli Tepe in southeast Turkey. And it's this site on top of a mountain very close to the ancient city of Edessa or Urfa. And here they discovered these incredible stone temples on top of the mountain there that showed a sophistication of carving and style that you would not possibly connect with the period of their construction, which is 9,500 BC down to about 8,000 BC. Here is almost evidence of some kind of lost civilization. It just shouldn't have been here. And of course, from my perspective, it was a case of, oh my God, this is what I've been predicting. That's what I predicted in From the Ashes of Angels, the very book written at the time when the first spades went into the ground there. The site was called Göbekli Tepe because all of these structures were found beneath this occupational mound, which was called Göbekli Tepe, which means something like the hill of the navel, basically. But the thing is that excavations continued at Göbekli Tepe and still do to this day, mostly initially under the auspice of a German archaeologist called Professor Klaus Schmidt, who sadly is no longer with us. He died in 2014. But he was very, very advanced in his ideas to do with Göbekli Tepe, left behind as a legacy a beautiful book on the subject, which I would recommend to anybody that they read to it. That, my own book, by the way, which is called Göbekli Tepe, Genesis of the Gods, that came out in 2014. And I've become very much the face of Göbekli Tepe on television, online, etc. And unfortunately, I think this has put a lot of noses out of joint at Göbekli Tepe. And I was there last year and literally thrown out with a tour group by the site manager and the lead archaeologist now, who's a guy called Dr. Lee Clare. And if you're interested in any of this, come onto my Facebook page, Andrew Collins, author. Read all about that over the last week. Not cool. But added to that is the fact that my book, From the Ashes of Angels, which has been a best-selling book in Turkey over the last week, has just been banned because it's been seen as promoting Kurdish culture and therefore is propaganda for the Kurdish cause and the PKK, the Kurdish Workers' Party, and therefore it's being seized and destroyed as we speak now. This is a huge story. It's been all the way across Turkey and has obviously been in the social media. So why is all this important to what we're saying now? Well, the Denisovans, the technology that came out of Siberia across the Ural Mountains and eventually ends up going into Europe, also goes down into Southwest Asia, bringing with them this stone tool technology called blade technology. Pressure flaking arrives in Turkey certainly by 9000 BC, and I'd like to think, maybe when Göbekli Tepe is constructed several hundred years earlier. And in my opinion, the people behind the construction of Göbekli Tepe were peoples coming from the north, the Russian steppe, down through the Caucasus region into Anatolia, bringing with them all of these ideas which were already many thousands of years old, and that this, along with a big cataclysm that occurred around just before this time called the Younger Dryas impact event, kick-started the building of monumental architecture at places like Göbekli Tepe around 9500 BC, and that this human group, the very ones I've been talking about since the writing of From the Ashes of Angels in 1996. That's who they were. But on top of this, what we haven't mentioned, and I'll just throw in now, is that there seems to have come with it a universal idea of shamanism, animism, and cosmological beliefs and practices that seems to be universal across the Eurasian continent and going into North America and probably being preserved there more thoroughly right the way through to the time of historic contact. And this would seem to have involved a death journey relating to the origin of the soul in the sky in a certain area, which is the area of the constellation of Cygnus, which was seen as a point of entry and exit to the sky world, and that this is something that was found not just at places like Göbekli Tepe but also in Egypt in the Pyramid Age, basically, and that this is something which is universal. My colleague Graham Hancock talks about this in his new book America Before, which has only just come out and vindicates a lot of work which I have been writing in my books since the time of From the Ashes of Angels. So that's the story as a whole, essentially.
Well, I've as I mentioned the other day, I bought the Seventh Sword, which is obviously some of the things are very local from me, and the information within it I find quite interesting because of some of the things I'm associated to in my private life. Tonight I've also just bought the Göbekli Tepe Genesis of the Gods book, and I've pre-ordered the Denisovan Origins book as well. So one thing I will be able to do in the coming weeks is to get a review up of that on our website and through social media, so I look forward to that.
Cool. Okay, well look, you've got plenty of reading to go there. And obviously your listeners are thinking, well, this is all very nice, where do I start if I want to read any of this guy's books? Well, I suppose the best thing to say is just read the latest one. It's called Denisovan Origins, Hybrid Humans, Göbekli Tepe, and the Genesis of the Giants of Ancient America. It's available now on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. It's coming out in the UK this week. So have a little read of that, and if you like any of that, then go back to From the Ashes of Angels from 1996, Göbekli Tepe Genesis Gods 2014, or even further back to the Seventh Sword, which I know is a pet interest of your own, and maybe we'll come back and talk about that sometime.
It certainly is. Yes, and obviously, if you just put your name, Andrew Collins, into Amazon search, you'll obviously find all your books there, but also your website, you've got books and DVDs via there as well, and other information regarding the things that you've done in the past 30 or so years.
Yeah. Well, okay, at andrewcollins.com, and you know, if you're interested in not just this, but the other hat that I wear, which is what we call psychic questing, which began 40 years ago this year, or this month, as we're coming into October, with the discovery of this sword and this jewel known as the Green Stone. It was the subject of my own book, the Seventh Sword, and that of my colleague Graham Phillips, called The Green Stone. We're celebrating that event, those incidents, our books, in an event in Wolverhampton on Saturday, October the 26th. We're calling it the Green Stone 40th anniversary convention, and look that up. It's all on my website, andrewcollins.com. andrewcollins.com.
And you have got a busy rest of the year ahead. This weekend, next weekend, you've got the CPAC conference in Newport.
Yeah.
The following weekend, you've got Edgar Casey's Our Ancient Mysteries conference in Virginia Beach. Following the 26th to 27th, the Greenstone 40. November the 13th, you're at Southend UFO Group. November the 16th, the Origins conference down in London. April the 2nd to the 5th next year, the Human Origins conference. And finally on your list of dates, May the 29th till June the 1st at Contact in the Desert. So you've got some quite some travelling going on.
Yep, doesn't stop.
I'd love to be in that position.
Maybe one day it would. So I would like to write another book one day.
Well, while we've been talking about the psychic questing, I meant to mention it off air earlier when we were chatting. But I know some people in the past, you may have come across the location. Had done something similar on Bidston Hill on the Wirral. Maybe that's something you could, if you haven't, you could look into yourself, because I'm sure you'd be quite interested in their findings in the past. So
I'll be honest, I don't know much about it, but it may be somewhere that will come up.
Fascinating. Well, what I'll do on that, I've actually published an article on the history of Bidston Hill, so I'll publish that over the coming week and send it over to you. And because there is some quite significant carvings on the hill itself of the sun god, the moon god, and such
I've
like.
heard about this.
And then obviously,
I do know about this.
Obviously, from there, there's alleged psychic questing that took place on Bidston Hill, which was quite prominent in its day. Let's say.
Yeah.
So I think we're up, because I promised you an hour tonight. I don't want to take up any more of your time. I know how busy you are. Andrew, I've got a number of articles via Eric von Daniken, which I'm allowed to use on the website, which I publish semi-regularly.
Right.
If there's anything, obviously, of your own that you'd like to provide for readers of the Archaeology and Metal Detecting magazine, obviously I'll be putting up a review of your book in the coming weeks. But if there's anything else of interest that you'd think people might like to learn a little bit more about, please feel free to send that over, and obviously we'll promote that widely.
Brilliant. Appreciate it.
So again, thank you very much, Andrew. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've had an abundance of things. I've got multiple tabs open because I've been reading multiple things while you've been speaking. I've heard every word. I'll listen back as well, because there's a lot I've probably not taken in 100% that myself, and there's certainly one listener who's been communicating with me off air called Tony Kaywood, who's been listening and obviously chatting in the chat room of the podcast.
Right.
So he's been very, very. A lot of plaudits for you speaking tonight, and I'm sure Tony's learnt a lot too, and have any other listeners. The programme itself, this will be automatically aired on Spreaker, on YouTube, and iTunes, iHeartRadio and Spotify. If I send you the link, obviously you can
Please
thereafter
do.
disseminate it to your colleagues and such
Definitely.
like for them to listen to. So again, I don't want to waste any more of your time. It's been an absolute pleasure. Pleasure to meet you, not personally but verbally. And all luck with your new book, and hopefully the whole Turkish incident will sort itself very soon.
Maybe. All right, okay. Cheers, Dave.
Thank you very much, Andrew.
Yeah, okay, mate.
Take care.
All the
Good
best,
night.
Bye-bye.
So that was Andrew Collins. Fascinating look at the history of the I'm going to try and say this properly now, the Denisovans, not Ovdovians, who were a quite advanced race dating back maybe up to 200,000 years ago. We spoke about his book, the Denisovan Origins, which is out this Thursday. And please, as I've done throughout the evening while I've been speaking, look up any of the information on the internet. It's widely available. Wikipedia might not be the best source, but it does contain the information that I needed to see while I was speaking tonight. I'm Dave Sadler from the BIG Podcast Network. Listen out for add a follow if you want to listen. Have an instant email to tell you when there's any more up and coming shows live. Also find us on YouTube, find the Archaeology Metal Detecting magazine on other social media. Thanks everybody.
The Archaeology and Metal Detecting magazine acts as a hub for information, offering articles from archaeologists, detectorists and other specialists throughout the genre, featuring many links, event info and news articles associated to archaeology and metal detecting. We also offer professional review services and promotion for books, resources, videos, documentaries, gadgets, equipment and much more. The magazine is run by the archaeological and metal detecting community for the archaeological and metal detecting community. So come visit us at archmdmag.com, that's archmdmag.com, and check out information from our media section with all the latest content, news from the Archaeology channel, podcasts and the YouTube channels that feature the now legendary Digger Dawn, the Man with the Hat and Archeo Duck, just to name a few. If you would like to offer an article, link or inquire about other services, then pay us a visit at archmdmag.com and drop us a line.